a crime so obvious yet full of hidden twists. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Tell me in the comments where you're following this case from. Reading your insights always makes the story richer. The investigation begins now. The February light lay pale and precise over the drawing room of Hallowmere House, turning every polished surface into a muted mirror. One could see with uncomfortable clarity the arrangement of things, the ivory figurines on the mantel, the neat stack of invitations on the mahogany escritoire, the tulips in their cut-glass vase, each stem measured, each bloom facing outward, as though even the flowers had been instructed to behave. It was a room made for agreement. Captain Hastings would later tell me that upon entering, he felt as if he had walked into a verdict. "You see, what mon ami?" said Hercule Poirot softly. "When everyone agrees, that is when I become most suspicious." He stood just inside the threshold, gloved hands behind his back, moustaches impeccable, eyes moving with the controlled delicacy of a man reading a page that others had skimmed. He did not advance at once. He absorbed, he weighed, he listened not only to what was said, but to what the room itself insisted upon. That order had been disturbed and must be restored, quickly, cleanly, without scandal. At the centre of that disturbance lay Sir Alistair Vane, sprawled in the deep leather wing chair by the fire, his head tipped slightly to one side, as though he had nodded off in the middle of a tedious conversation. His dinner jacket was unrumpled, his hands, pale against the dark leather, were open, palms upward in a gesture of mild surrender, and yet his eyes, wide, fixed, glassy, had no surrender in them at all. Dr. Meredith Lyle, a thin man with immaculate cuffs and a manner that attempted reassurance, cleared his throat. "It was quite peaceful," he said. "No struggle, no cry. He simply, stopped." Inspector Japp, who had arrived ahead of Poirot and disliked the house already, tugged at his collar, as though the air were too polite to breathe. "Everyone here says the same thing," he muttered. "They all agree on it. Heart. Old engine giving up. Neat as you please." "Neat," Poirot repeated, and there was something in the word that made Hastings glance at him. Lady Vane sat upon a sofa that seemed to have been chosen for the purpose of supporting grief without wrinkling it. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, so her mourning not yet official but already rehearsed, a dark gown, a handkerchief, eyes reddened to the acceptable degree. Beside her stood Miss Celia March, the companion, young, pretty, and trembling, in a way that looked sincere, until one noticed how carefully she kept herself from the chair by the fire. On the far side of the room, near the window, Mr. Rupert Vane, Sir Alistair's nephew, leaned against the curtain with the exhausted posture of a man who has prepared for disappointment all his life and is relieved to have been correct. He held a cigarette he did not smoke. His gaze flicked repeatedly to the escritoire where the invitations lay, as though the paper might speak. Near the bookcase, almost swallowed by it, stood Mrs. Agatha Pritchard, the housekeeper, stiff as a ramrod, lips pressed into a line of righteous restraint. But her eyes were on Poirot, and in them was the silent accusation of the servant class, "Do not make a mess of this." Finally, hovering at the edge like a rumour that had grown legs, was Mr. Lionel Crane, Sir Alistair's solicitor, well-fed, well-barbered, and distinctly anxious that his client had died without consulting him first. Poirot moved at last, stepping toward the chair with the reverence of a man approaching a shrine. He did not touch the body. He did not need to. Instead, he looked long and deeply, as though Sir Alistair's expression were a sentence missing one small but essential word. "The time?" Poirot asked. Dr. Lyle obliged quickly. "Just after 10. We had coffee in here at 9:30. Sir Alistair took his brandy, one finger, as usual. Lady Vane rang for the tray to be cleared at 10:15. At 10, Miss March noticed he wasn't responding. I examined him at once. And you found? Poirot's voice remained mild, but Hastings had heard that mildness before. It was the velvet over the steel. A cardiac arrest, said Dr. Lisle. He had a weak heart, Monsieur Poirot. He was 72. He had complained of tightness in his chest earlier in the week. I advised rest. Inspector Japp snorted. Open and shut, if it weren't for the complication. The complication? Poirot's eyes did not leave Sir Alistair. Japp nodded toward the mantel where an empty space gaped between two ivory figurines. Something's missing. Lady says it was the Vane sapphire. Big stone, family piece. Kept in a little case up there, gone. Lady Vane lifted her chin, suffering arranged into dignity. Alistair insisted on keeping it here, she said. He despised banks. And he said nothing ever happened at Hallowmere. He was so certain. Poirot turned his head slightly. And you, madam, were you also certain? Her hand tightened on the handkerchief. Of course. We were all here. We had coffee together. We spoke. We laughed. Even, God forgive us, about Rupert's dreadful French pronunciation. There was no quarrel, no scene. Alistair died as he lived, quietly. A murmur of assent passed through the room like a practised refrain. Yes, said Rupert Vane, voice rough. Quietly, that's the point. Everyone agreed. He was old. He had a heart. He died. And the sapphire, well, someone took it after. Opportunists, aren't they? Like rats when the house goes still. Miss March whispered, It was so dreadful, so sudden, but it was not violent. Crane the solicitor ventured. The constable asked if there were enemies. There were none. Sir Alistair was universally respected. Mrs. Pritchard's lips tightened further, as if universally were a stain. Poirot's gaze drifted at last from the dead man to the living room itself. The tulips aligned like soldiers, the invitations stacked like testimony, the empty place on the mantel as conspicuous as a missing tooth. Then he looked back at Sir Alistair Vane and spoke, not to anyone in particular, but to the certainty hanging in the air. When everyone agrees, said Hercule Poirot, it is sometimes because the truth is inconvenient. He turned, and his eyes, bright, polite, unyielding, rested upon each face in turn. Mesdames, Messieurs, he said, you tell me a story in which there is no struggle, no anger, no surprise, a death that is agreed upon, and yet... He paused. And the pause was like a finger tapping a glass. And yet there is a jewel that has vanished, and a room that is too tidy for tragedy. I do not like it. Inspector Japp gave a short laugh, but it held no amusement. Hastings felt a peculiar chill, an awareness that beneath the calm surface of Hallowmere House, something had already shifted. Poirot's moustaches lifted slightly as though even they disapproved. Now, he said gently, we shall begin again, not with what you all agree on, but with what you do not wish to say. Poirot did not at once begin the rapid questioning Japp expected. He walked to the tulips and with 2 fingers turned one stem a fraction so that the blooms faced evenly. Only when the line pleased him did he speak. You will permit, he said to Lady Vane, that I make my little promenade. I look, I listen, and I allow the facts to arrange themselves. Mrs. Pritchard watched those careful hands as though a guest had begun to rearrange her cupboards. Poirot crossed to the mantel. The 3 ivory shepherds stood in their frozen pastoral, and between them and the clock yawned the empty space. He bent, studying the faint, clean outline on the wood where something had sat. Here, he murmured. A little case, perhaps of Morocco leather. It has been removed with care. One does not scratch the polish. Then it was someone from the house, I said, before I could stop myself. Poirot glanced at me. Possibly, Hastings, but we must not marry the idea too quickly. He straightened and addressed the room. At 10:15 the tray is cleared. At 10, Mademoiselle March notices that Sir Alister does not respond. Between these moments, or one of you has stood, crossed this room, and taken the sapphire, or— He paused delicately. It was taken earlier, and the death is used to make it seem an afterthought. Lady Vane's cheeks flushed. Monsieur Poirot, you speak of death as if it were arranged. As if a heart may be persuaded, Poirot replied almost gently. Hearts stop for fear, for anger, for shame, and sometimes they are helped. Dr. Lisle gave a thin protest. There is no evidence of— Poirot lifted a gloved hand. Doctor, we shall come to evidence. For the moment, I ask only for exactness. You will each tell me where you were when the tray was cleared and what you did afterward. Japp seized the moment. Right, one by one, no speeches, Lady Vane began, as though rank entitled her to the first word. When the maid came, I was on the sofa. I spoke with Alister. He was quite himself. After the tray went, I remained seated. My slipper pinched, and I didn't wish to move. Miss March fetched me a cushion. Miss March nodded too quickly. Yes. I went to the little table by the window and brought the cushion. Then I returned to my chair. There. And you, Monsieur Rupert? Poirot asked. Rupert Vane finally drew on his cigarette. By the window. I didn't go near the mantel. I didn't go near my uncle either. He never cared for my hovering. You were not close, Poirot observed. Rupert's mouth tightened. He thought me idle. I thought him tyrannical. We managed like most families. Crane, the solicitor, cleared his throat. I was here at Sir Alister's invitation to discuss certain papers. We concluded at 9:30. When the tray was cleared, I was near the bookcase, looking for a volume he mentioned. Afterward I remained there until Miss March spoke and the commotion began. Mrs. Pritchard had tried to become furniture. Now she spoke stiffly. I was not in the room. I stood in the corridor to keep the servants from gossiping. When the maid took the tray, I was at the door. Afterward I went to the pantry to check the accounts. Japp pounced. So you left the floor. Convenient. Her eyes flashed. I have served this family 30 years. I do not steal. Poirot's voice was soothing. Madame Pritchard, I do not accuse. I ask only, when you went to the pantry, did you pass the study? Yes, she admitted. And the door of the study, was it open? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Poirot's gaze sharpened. It was ajar, she said at last, but it is often ajar. Because someone enters, Poirot said mildly. Or leaves. Japp snapped his notebook open. Then we'll look at the study. Maybe the jewels stashed. Maybe there's a window trick. Come on. They moved into the corridor, and the house seemed suddenly less like a stage set for society and more like a careful maze built to keep secrets. Doors stood closed with an air of discretion. The smell of beeswax and old books clung to the air. At the study door, Japp pushed it fully open. The room was smaller than the drawing room, but sharper in purpose. A heavy desk, a green-shaded lamp, ledgers, and a safe set into the wall behind a framed portrait of Sir Alister in hunting pink. Crane stepped forward, wringing his hands. Sir Alister kept the combination to himself. I never— Poirot's fingers slid along the edge of the portrait frame. And yet the portrait is not quite straight, he said. Someone has touched it recently, Mrs. Pritchard began. The dusting. Poirot smiled. Always the dusting. Then let us see how the dusting has been done. He lifted the portrait. The safe's dial gleamed in the lamplight. And on the green felt of the desk below, as if placed there to be found, lay a small Morocco leather case, empty, its clasp snapped shut with a decisive, almost mocking click. Poirot did not touch it. He only looked at us, waiting. For a moment no one spoke. The empty case lay upon the green, felt like a polite confession, tidy, undeniable, and wholly unsatisfying. Inspector Japp was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said briskly, "that's that. Thief panics, hides the jewel here, changes his mind, takes the stone, and leaves the box." "Simple." "Simple," Poirot repeated softly. He stepped forward at last and, how with exquisite care, examined the Morocco case without lifting it. His head inclined slightly to one side. "You observe, Hastings," he murmured. "The position?" "It's in plain sight," I said. "Precisely, in plain sight, but not careless. It is centered with the edge of the desk. The clasp faces outward. It is placed, not dropped." Japp frowned. "So?" "So," Poirot continued, "the person who left it wished it to be found quickly. That suggests confidence, or calculation." Crane swallowed audibly. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, the jewel is the principal matter. The Vane sapphire is worth—" "Less," Poirot interrupted gently, "than a human life." Crane subsided. Poirot turned to Mrs. Pritchard. "You say the study door was ajar when you passed?" "Yes." "And when you returned from the pantry?" "It was closed." Inspector Japp looked up sharply. "Closed? You didn't mention that." "You did not ask," she replied stiffly. "I assumed Sir Alistair had shut it. He disliked draughts." Poirot's eyes flickered. "Yet Sir Alistair was at that time seated by the fire in the drawing-room." A silence fell again, less polite now. Dr. Lyle shifted uneasily. "If someone entered the study between the tray being cleared and the discovery—" "They had little time," Poirot finished. 5 minutes, perhaps less." Rupert Vane gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Are we to believe one of us slipped out, raided the mantel, deposited the empty case in here, and returned without being noticed? We were scarcely 20 feet apart." "Ah," said Poirot, "but you were not watching one another every second." Miss March clasped her hands together. "Have I never left Lady Vane's side after I fetched the cushion?" "Except," Poirot said quietly, "to cry out when you noticed Sir Alistair." Her eyes widened. "Of course." "And in that moment," he continued, "everyone rose. Everyone moved. There was confusion." Japp nodded slowly. "Plenty of cover, then." Lady Vane's composure began to fray. "Are you suggesting that while my husband lay dying—" "I suggest nothing yet, madame. I assemble." He moved around the desk now, studying the safe. "Monsieur Crane, you say you did not know the combination." "I swear it." "And Sir Alistair, did he open it this evening?" "No." Rupert exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "My uncle trusted no one with that safe, not even my aunt." Lady Vane's head snapped toward him, but she said nothing. Poirot touched the dial lightly. "Inspector." Has the safe been examined?" "Not yet. We came straight here when the housekeeper mentioned the study." "Then let us not disturb it for the moment," Poirot said. "The case upon the desk is enough to tell me something." "And what's that?" Japp demanded. "That the theft and the death are married events," Poirot replied. Dr. Lyle stiffened. "Sir Alistair died of heart failure." "Perhaps," said Poirot. "But I ask myself, why remove the sapphire from the mantel at all? If one intended to steal it later, the commotion of a sudden death would offer ample opportunity. Instead, we have an empty case displayed in the study." "To mislead," Rupert said flatly. "Exactly, but mislead whom? The police or us?" He stepped back from the desk and regarded them all in turn. "Let us return to the drawing-room.
he said.
I wish to see again the chair by the fire. They obeyed him almost unconsciously. The house seemed altered now, the corridors narrower, the air less agreeable. Back in the drawing-room, Sir Alister's body had not been moved. The wing chair faced slightly toward the mantel. Poirot stood where the dead man's eyes would have rested. "Hastings," he said quietly, "from here, can one see the mantel clearly?" "Yes." "And the study door?" "Not directly. It's around the corner of the corridor." Poirot nodded. Then if Sir Alister sat here at 10:15, he would see anyone approach the mantel. "Unless," Japp said slowly, "he'd already—" "Ceased to observe," Poirot finished. Miss March gave a small, strangled sound. Poirot bent, examining the small table beside the chair. A brandy glass stood upon it, only a thin, amber residue clinging to the bottom. "Doctor," Poirot said without looking up, "did you examine the contents?" There was little left, merely brandy. "Did Sir Alister drink it all?" "So far as I saw." Poirot straightened. "And you are certain his death was instantaneous?" "As near as makes no difference." "But not quite the same as sleeping?" Poirot murmured. Lady Vane rose abruptly. "This is intolerable." "You imply what? That someone poisoned him?" The word hung in the air like a dropped plate. Inspector Japp looked sharply at Dr. Lyle. The doctor flushed. There were no obvious signs, no convulsions. "Poisons do not always announce themselves dramatically," Poirot said. "Some whisper." Rupert ground his cigarette into the tray with unnecessary force. "If you suspect poison, test the glass." "We shall," Japp said. Poirot, however, was watching Miss March. She had edged nearer the mantel, her gaze fixed not on the empty space, but on Sir Alister's face. "You were fond of him?" Poirot asked gently. "Yes," she whispered. "He was kind." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you were the first to notice that he did not respond." Her head lifted. "Because I spoke to him. I asked if he would like more coal on the fire. He did not answer." "And you touched him?" Yes, his hand." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which hand?" She hesitated. "His right." Poirot glanced at the body. The right hand lay open, palm upward. "And it was warm?" he asked. Miss March's lips parted. I don't remember." "But you remember the coal?" Poirot said. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "Right. We'll have the glass tested."
"And the body examined proper?" Poirot nodded, but his gaze lingered on the mantel, on the neat tulips, on the chair. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "someone wished us to agree. To agree that a heart failed. To agree that a jewel was taken in opportunism. Agreement is comfortable. It requires no further thought." He turned to face them fully. "But I do not agree." The declaration did not ring loudly, yet it seemed to alter the very temperature of the room. Agreement had been their refuge. Poirot had quietly removed it. Inspector Japp drew a steadying breath. "All right. If we don't agree, we verify. I'll have the body examined properly and the brandy glass sent off at once." Dr. Lyle inclined his head, though a faint rigidity had crept into his manner. "I shall, of course, assist." "Merci, Doctor," Poirot said politely.
But before Sir Alister is moved, I would observe one or two small details." He bent again over the chair. Hastings, myself, watched as his eyes travelled not to the face, but to the line of the shoulders, the fall of the jacket, the position of the feet upon the hearthrug. "Curious," he murmured. "What is?" Japp asked. "The rug," Poirot replied. "It's slightly displaced." Rupert gave a short laugh. We all stood when Celia cried out. We must have jostled it. Possibly, yet the edge nearest the chair is folded under, as if caught by a heel. He pointed delicately. Indeed, the thick Persian rug showed a small, uneven ripple beneath Sir Alistair's right shoe. "Did he rise?" Poirot asked. "No," said Miss March quickly. "He never moved." "Not after you spoke to him?" "No." Poirot looked up at her. "And before?" She faltered. He was sitting, just as you see." Lady Vane interjected, her composure strained thin. "Alistair complained of chill. He asked Rupert to stir the fire." Rupert nodded reluctantly. "I did. I stepped forward with the poker." "And you stood where?" Poirot's voice remained mild. "Here." Rupert moved to the hearth, demonstrating. In doing so, he brushed the very corner of the rug that Poirot had indicated. "Ah," said Poirot softly. "And in stirring the fire, you might have nudged the rug?" "Perhaps," Rupert conceded. "I wasn't measuring my movements." "No," Poirot agreed. "You were not." He straightened and regarded the brandy glass once more. "Inspector, permit me." With a handkerchief, he lifted the glass and held it toward the light. The amber residue clung unevenly. "Hastings," he said, "observe the rim." I leaned closer. There was a faint, cloudy smudge along one side, as though something had dulled the crystal. "Lipstick?" Japp suggested. Lady Vane stiffened. "I do not drink brandy." "Nor I," Miss March whispered. Poirot lowered the glass. "It is not lipstick, it is a film. Subtle, but present." Dr. Lyle's voice was carefully neutral. "Brandy can leave sediment." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "But sediment does not arrange itself in a crescent precisely where the lips would touch." He replaced the glass upon the table. "We shall know more when it is tested." Mrs. Pritchard, who had remained near the door, spoke abruptly. Sir Alistair disliked being touched. Poirot turned. "In what sense, madame?" He valued his space. He would not have tolerated someone leaning over him without remark. Miss March's eyes filled. "I only touched his hand when he did not answer." "Just so," Poirot said gently. "And yet, if another person approached him earlier, close enough to doctor his drink, for example, he would have objected." Rupert's expression hardened. "Are you accusing one of us of slipping something into his glass while he watched?" "I accuse no one," Poirot replied. "I reconstruct." Inspector Japp stepped nearer the mantel. "Let's go back to the sapphire. If the jewel was taken before he died, he'd have seen that too." "Unless," Poirot said quietly, "he was already dead, or believed to be." The words fell heavily. Dr. Lyle frowned. "That is impossible. I examined him within minutes." "Minutes can be elastic," Poirot observed. When Miss March cried out, there was movement, confusion. Who was nearest to Sir Alistair at that instant? Miss March swallowed.
I was." "And you, madame?" he asked Lady Vane. I rose at once. "And you, Monsieur Rupert?" I stepped back from the fire. "And Monsieur Crane?" "I came forward, I think." "And Mrs. Pritchard?" "I was at the door when the cry came. I entered immediately." Poirot nodded slowly, as though fitting pieces into a private pattern. "Then," he said, for a brief moment, all eyes were upon Sir Alistair. And in such moments, small acts may pass unnoticed. Rupert exhaled sharply. "This is madness. If someone poisoned him, why steal the sapphire? Why leave the empty case?" "Because," Poirot replied, "the sapphire explains the agitation. It provides motive for intrusion. It makes the death appear incidental." Lady Vane's voice trembled, despite her effort to steady it.
"Tana, you suggest that the jewel was taken to disguise murder. I suggest that someone wished us to think the death natural and the theft opportunistic," Poirot said. "Agreement again." Inspector Japp rubbed his chin. All right. Suppose the poison's in the brandy. Who poured it? Mrs. Pritchard answered at once. The maid brought the tray. Sir Alistair poured his own brandy from the decanter. And the decanter? Japp demanded. It remains upon the sideboard. They turned. The crystal decanter stood half full, catching the pale light. Poirot approached it, but did not touch. Inspector, have this tested also, but I wonder— What now? Japp asked. Poirot's gaze drifted back to the study door, visible from the corridor. I wonder, he said slowly, whether the poison was in the glass at all. A collective intake of breath followed. Doctor. Lyle stared. If not the glass, then perhaps, Poirot continued, in something else Sir Alistair consumed, or touched. Miss March's hand flew to her mouth. The coffee? Or the sugar? Poirot murmured. Or— His eyes rested upon the tulips. Hastings felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. The flowers, I said incredulously. Poirot did not answer at once. He stepped toward the vase and inhaled faintly. Order, he said softly. Such careful order. Inspector Japp threw up his hands. Flowers don't kill, Poirot. Poirot turned, and for a fleeting instant there was steel beneath the civility. Anything may kill, my friend, he said, when placed at the exact right moment, in the exact right hand. He faced the assembled company once more. We must reconstruct precisely the minutes before the cry. No assumptions, no agreement. Oh, only truth. Outside, the pale February light shifted, and somewhere in the house a clock began to strike the half-hour. The clock's chime faded into a silence that felt expectant rather than restful. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and regarded them all with patient insistence. We return, he said quietly, to 9:30. The coffee has been served. Sir Alistair pours his brandy. The tray is cleared at 9:45. Between these moments lies our truth. He turned first to Mrs. Pritchard. The coffee? Who prepared it? The kitchen maid brewed it, she replied. I poured and carried it in myself. You poured for everyone? Yes. Sir Alistair took no sugar. Lady Vane, 1 lump. Miss March, 2. Mr. Rupert and Mr. Crane, none. And you, Doctor? I declined, said Dr. Lyle. Coffee disturbs my sleep. Poirot nodded.
And the cups, were they placed before each guest? Yes, Mrs. Pritchard answered firmly. I handed each cup directly. No tray left unattended? None. Poirot inclined his head, satisfied for the moment. Then we consider the brandy. Inspector Japp crossed to the sideboard and examined the decanter without touching it. If poison's in there, we'll know soon enough. But if it is not, Poirot murmured, then the glass itself becomes more interesting. He turned to Rupert. You stirred the fire at Sir Alistair's request. Did you pass behind him? Rupert frowned. I stepped close, near enough to feel the heat. Close enough to reach the table beside him? I suppose so, but I didn't. Suppose, Poirot repeated gently. Memory is elastic, Monsieur Rupert. We must stretch it carefully. Rupert's jaw tightened. Why, I had no reason to kill him. No? Poirot's tone was mild. Your inheritance does not depend upon his death. Crane shifted uneasily. Sir Alistair's will is not yet read, Poirot finished smoothly. But I imagine Monsieur Rupert stands to gain. Rupert's eyes flashed. I've stood to gain for 20 years. That doesn't make me a murderer. No, Poirot agreed. It does not. It makes you human. He moved now toward Miss March. You fetched a cushion for Lady Vane from the window table. Yes. And in doing so, you passed near the mantel. Her gaze flickered. Yes, but I did not touch it. You did not glance at it? No. Poirot studied her a moment longer than comfort allowed. "And when you spoke to Sir Alistair about the coal, how did he appear?" "Quiet," she whispered. His eyes were open." "Did he breathe?" "I assumed so." "But you did not hear?" She shook her head helplessly. Lady Vane rose again, agitation breaking through her composure. "Must we dissect every second? Alistair's heart was weak. The doctor warned him." Dr. Lyle inclined his head gravely. "I did." Poirot's eyes rested upon him. "Doctor, when you examined Sir Alistair, you found no sign of struggle?" "None." "No discoloration? No scent?" "Nothing beyond what I would expect." Poirot was silent for a long moment. "Hastings," he said suddenly, "if a man's heart fails, does he always remain so composed?" "Not always," I admitted. "There can be distress." "Exactly." Poirot gestured lightly toward the body. "Yet Sir Alistair sits as though he has arranged himself." Inspector Japp frowned.
You think he was positioned after death?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that he does not look surprised." The remark seemed absurd, yet none of us could dismiss it. Mrs. Pritchard spoke again, reluctantly. "Sir Alistair disliked disorder. Even in illness he would straighten his cuffs." Poirot's head tilted. "Ah, and tonight?" All eyes dropped to the dead man's sleeves. One cuff was indeed straight, the other was slightly twisted, as if adjusted in haste. Rupert swore under his breath. Poirot stepped back. "Inspector, I would ask that no one leave Hallowmere House until we have clarity." "That's understood," Japp said firmly. Crane dabbed his forehead. "This is becoming most distressing." "For the guilty, yes," Poirot murmured. He approached the tulips once more. Their stems stood rigid in the water. "Mrs. Pritchard, why, who arranged these flowers?" "I did, this afternoon." "And no one touched them since?" "No." Poirot bent slightly and examined the waterline inside the vase. "Curious." "What now?" Japp asked impatiently. "The water is lower than it should be," Poirot replied. Mrs. Pritchard stiffened. "Flowers drink." "Not so much in a single evening," Poirot said softly. He did not elaborate. Instead, he turned to Miss March once more. "Mademoiselle, when you touched Sir Alistair's right hand, was it moist?" She stared at him, startled. "Moist? Damp, as if from condensation, or water?" Her lips parted. I thought it cold." "Cold and dry?" he pressed. She hesitated. "Perhaps slightly damp." Inspector Japp's eyes sharpened. "Damp from what?" Poirot's gaze moved slowly from the tulips to the brandy glass and then to the folded edge of the rug. "Awed from contact," he said quietly. Rupert stared at him. "You're suggesting someone dipped something, what? Into the vase?" "I suggest nothing yet," Poirot replied. "But I observe that water leaves traces." Dr. Lyle's composure wavered. "This is conjecture." "Everything begins as conjecture," Poirot answered calmly. "Then it becomes certainty." A constable appeared at the doorway, saluting Japp. "Car's ready, sir, for the body?" Poirot raised a hand. One moment more. He stepped close to Sir Alistair and, with infinite care, examined the fingertips of the right hand without touching. "Hastings," he said softly, "do you see?" I leaned nearer. On the index finger, barely visible, was a faint, pale mark, as though something had rested there briefly, leaving the slightest discoloration. "A ring?" I ventured. "No," Poirot said.
Not a ring." He straightened. "Inspector," he said evenly, "have the vase water preserved as well?" Japp blinked. "You're serious?" "Perfectly." The constable shifted uneasily. Lady Vane's voice came thin and strained. "You believe the flowers killed my husband?" Poirot met her gaze without flinching. I believe, madame, he said quietly, that someone in this room understood very well what would be agreed upon and what would not. Outside, the winter light dimmed another shade, and within Hallowmere House the air felt heavier, as though the truth itself had begun to press against the walls. The constable hesitated only a fraction before nodding and withdrawing to carry out Inspector Japp's orders. The mention of preserving the vase water had altered the atmosphere more decisively than any accusation.
But what had seemed an eccentric speculation now hovered with uncomfortable plausibility. Lady Vane sank back onto the sofa. "This is grotesque," she murmured. "Flowers, poison, water. It is like some melodrama." Poirot's expression remained serene. "On the contrary, madame, it is very domestic. That is why it succeeds." Inspector Japp folded his arms. "All right, Poirot. Suppose someone introduced poison into the vase. How does that kill a man sitting in a chair?" Poirot turned towards Sir Alister's body once more. "We consider the faint dampness upon his right hand. We consider the pale mark upon the index finger. We consider that Sir Alister sat close enough to the table that one might lean over him under some innocent pretext." Rupert's voice sharpened. "What pretext?" "To adjust the flowers," Poirot replied quietly. And Miss March gave a small cry. "No one touched them." "No one admits to touching them," Poirot corrected gently. Mrs. Pritchard bristled. "I arranged them at 4 o'clock. They were perfect." "Indeed," Poirot said, and his gaze softened almost kindly. "Too perfect." He approached the vase again, and this time, using his handkerchief, lifted it slightly from the table. A faint ring marked where it had stood. Beside that ring, almost invisible against the polished wood, was a second, lighter circle, as though the vase had rested there before being moved a fraction of an inch. Inspector Japp stepped closer. "It's been shifted." "Just so," Poirot said. Rupert ran a hand through his hair. "People bump tables. It proves nothing." "Nothing alone," Poirot agreed, "but everything together." Dr. Lisle cleared his throat. "Even if the water were contaminated, the poison would have to enter the bloodstream." Sir Alister did not drink from the vase. "Non," Poirot said, "but he might have touched it." "Touched it?" Lady Vane repeated faintly. Poirot inclined his head. "Imagine, madame, that someone, concerned for the aesthetic symmetry of the room, leans over Sir Alister and lifts a drooping tulip. In doing so, a small quantity of water spills upon his hand. If that water contains a rapidly absorbed toxin, perhaps one entering through a small cut, or transferred later when he raises his fingers to his lips." Inspector Japp's brows rose. "You're suggesting contact poison." "I suggest possibility," Poirot replied. "A man of Sir Alister's age with a weakened heart might succumb swiftly." Dr. Lisle's composure faltered more visibly now.
Such substances are rare." "Rare?" Poirot said softly. "But not unknown." Silence fell again, but it was no longer disbelief, it was calculation. Rupert spoke first. "If someone meant to poison him that way, they'd need certainty he'd touch the water. Or that he would be made to," Poirot said. Miss March stared at him. "Made to?" "You spoke to him about the fire?" Poirot reminded her. "Did he respond? No? Did you lean over him?" Yes." "And did you perhaps brush the table? Disturb the flowers?" She shook her head vehemently. "No." Poirot watched her carefully, then turned to Lady Vane. "Madame, you mentioned your slipper pinched. Did you rise at any time before the cry?" "No, I remained seated." "And yet," Poirot continued gently, "you are the mistress of this house. You value order. If you had seen a flower slightly out of line, would you have corrected it?" Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Inspector Japp looked between them. "You think Lady Vane moved the vase?" "I think," Poirot said evenly, "that someone with an eye for symmetry adjusted it." Mrs. Pritchard stiffened. "I do not permit disorder." Poirot turned swiftly. "Ah!" Colour rose in her cheeks. "If a stem had drooped, I would have straightened it, and that is all." "And did you?" She hesitated. Too long. Rupert swore again. "For God's sake!" Poirot's voice cut gently through the rising agitation. "When Miss March cried out, you entered the room, yes?" "Yes." "And before that?" "I stood at the corridor." "But you passed the table when you came in?" "Yes." "And did you touch the vase then?" Her hands trembled slightly. "I may have steadied it. The table is narrow." Inspector Japp seized on that.
Steadying it with wet hands? No. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Madame Pritchard, when you arranged the flowers this afternoon, did you wear gloves? Yes. And tonight? She faltered again. No. Poirot nodded slowly, as though confirming something inwardly. Dr. Lyle interjected, perhaps too quickly. This is absurd. A servant would hardly possess such knowledge of poisons. Poirot's eyes flicked toward him. Knowledge is acquired in many ways, Doctor. The constable returned quietly. The body's ready, sir? Inspector Japp nodded. Take him. As they bore Sir Alistair from the room, a curious lightness seemed to follow. Yet it was not relief. It was the removal of certainty. Poirot remained still until the door closed behind them. Then he turned back to the mantel. The sapphire, he said softly. It distracts. It creates motive where none may exist. Rupert's expression hardened. You think the jewel was never the aim? I think, Poirot replied, that the jewel was a device, a flourish. Lady Vane's voice trembled. Alistair would never have allowed anyone near that sapphire. Except, Poirot said quietly, someone he trusted. The implication hung in the air. Inspector Japp exhaled slowly. All right, we wait for the tests. On the glass, the decanter, the vase water. Yes, Poirot agreed. But we do not wait idly. He faced them all, his gaze penetrating yet composed. There is one among you, he said, who counted upon agreement, upon our willingness to accept the obvious. That person miscalculated only one thing. And what's that? Rupert demanded. Poirot's moustaches lifted faintly. My little grey cells, he said softly. Outside, but the light had faded almost entirely, and within Hallowmere House the shadows lengthened, not across furniture alone, but across faces. Even after Sir Alistair's body had been carried from the room, no one suggested leaving. It was as though the removal of the corpse had stripped away the last pretence. What remained was not grief, but exposure. Inspector Japp checked his watch. We'll have preliminary word within the hour, he said. Until then, nobody wanders. Rupert gave a humourless smile. I doubt any of us feel inclined to wander. Poirot, however, did not appear to wait for laboratory confirmations. He seated himself in the very wing chair Sir Alistair had occupied, adjusting his coat-tails with fastidious care before settling. Hastings, he said quietly,
observe how one sees the room from here. I took a position slightly behind him. From the chair, the mantel was directly ahead, the side table at one's right hand, the corridor visible at an angle. Anyone entering the room could be seen. Anyone approaching the flowers would cross the field of vision. He could see everything, I murmured. Just so, Poirot said. He rose again almost immediately and paced the small distance between chair and mantel, counting softly under his breath. Then he stopped before the sofa where Lady Vane sat. Madame, he said gently, when you were seated here, you faced your husband? Yes. And you conversed? For a time? Of what? She hesitated. Of the invitations, the dinner next week, of Rupert's prospects. Rupert shifted irritably.
And did Sir Alistair appear troubled? No, not even when Monsieur Rupert stirred the fire. She frowned faintly. Alistair disliked fuss, but no, he said nothing. Poirot nodded and turned to Rupert. When you stood at the hearth, you were between Sir Alistair and the mantel. Yes. For how long? A minute, perhaps less. And in that minute, if someone behind you adjusted the flowers, you would not necessarily observe it. Rupert's eyes narrowed. If someone behind me leaned across my uncle, I'd notice. Unless your attention was on the coals, Poirot said mildly. Rupert did not answer. Poirot now addressed Miss March. Mademoiselle, when you fetched the cushion, did you glance at Sir Alistair? Yes. Did his expression alter at any time that evening? She swallowed.
He seemed distracted. In what way? As though listening. To what? I don't know. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Did he touch the flowers at any point? Adjust them himself? No? Mrs. Pritchard interjected stiffly. He would not. That was my responsibility. Indeed, Poirot said softly. A footstep sounded in the corridor. The constable returned, speaking low to Japp. The inspector's face shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Well? Poirot asked calmly. Japp cleared his throat. Preliminary indication from the surgeon. There's no obvious heart lesion. They're reserving final judgment, but they're not satisfied it was natural. A faint sound escaped Lady Vane, half gasp, half protest. And the glass? Poirot asked. Traces of something unusual. They're analysing further. Poirot inclined his head as though a private equation had just balanced. Merci, he said. The room seemed to contract. Dr. Lyle's voice was tight. Preliminary indications are not conclusions. No, Poirot agreed, but they guide us. He walked slowly toward the sideboard and examined the decanter once more. Inspector, has anyone here professional knowledge of chemistry, medicine, botany perhaps? Dr. Lyle stiffened. I am a physician. Of course, Poirot said smoothly. And you attended Sir Alistair regularly? Yes. For his heart? Yes. And did you prescribe anything new this week? A mild tonic. Which he kept where? In the study? Rupert glanced sharply toward the corridor. Poirot noticed. You were surprised, monsieur? I didn't know, Rupert said shortly.
Because you do not frequent the study? Poirot asked. Because my uncle did not share his ailments. Poirot's eyes lingered on him a moment, then shifted to Mrs. Pritchard. Madame, who cleans the study? I do. And the desk? Yes. And you would notice if a bottle were removed? She hesitated. Yes. Was one removed this evening? No. Poirot folded his hands thoughtfully. Then perhaps nothing was taken from the study, only placed there. The empty case, Hastings said. Precisely. Inspector Japp exhaled slowly. So whoever killed him staged the jewel theft after he was dead. Or, Poirot corrected, just before. Silence again. Miss March spoke in a thin voice. If he was already poisoned, he might not have realized. Exactly, Poirot said. Lady Vane looked up sharply. You believe he was dying while we spoke? I believe, Poirot replied quietly, that he may have felt a sudden weakness, perhaps a chill. Perhaps he reached for the table, touched the damp surface, then sank back, unable to protest. Rupert's face had paled. That would require precise timing. Yes, Poirot said softly. And confidence. Dr. Lyle stepped forward abruptly. This line of speculation is intolerable. You speak as though the murderer sits calmly among us. Poirot met his gaze evenly. He does. The doctor's composure cracked for a fleeting instant before he mastered it. Inspector Japp's voice was firm now. No one leaves. We'll have full results shortly. Poirot moved once more to the mantel and regarded the empty space where the sapphire had rested. There is one thing, he said quietly, that troubles me more than poison. I'm more than jewels. And that is? Japp asked. The agreement, Poirot replied. The unanimity with which you all declared it a natural death. He turned slowly, his eyes resting on each face in turn. Grief does not speak in chorus, fear does. The words settled heavily. Outside, night had fully fallen, and the drawing-room lamps cast sharp pools of light that left the corners in shadow. In that carefully ordered room, with its aligned tulips and polished wood, something unseen had shifted irrevocably, and for the first time the certainty that had greeted Sir Alistair's death seemed not merely mistaken, but constructed. The word lingered, constructed, and in its wake came not protest, but a subtle withdrawal, as though each person present retreated half a step into private calculation. Inspector Japp broke the stillness. All right, Poirot. You say fear speaks in chorus. Fear of what? Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he crossed to the escritoire, where the invitations lay stacked with geometric precision. He lifted the top card and examined it. A dinner next week, he murmured. 12 guests. Lady Vane straightened slightly. Yes? Including the solicitor? Poirot asked without looking up. Crane started. Yes. Sir Alistair intended to make an announcement. Rupert's head snapped toward him. What announcement? Crane faltered. I am not at liberty. Liberty? Rupert barked. He's dead. Poirot replaced the invitation carefully. Monsieur Crane, you will forgive me, but the dead often liberate the living from discretion. Crane's face shone with perspiration. Sir Alistair altered his will last month. A sharp intake of breath came from Lady Vane. Or in what manner? Poirot asked gently. The principal estate was to remain with Lady Vane for her lifetime, Crane said hurriedly. Afterward, it would pass to a charitable foundation, medical research. Rupert's cigarette fell unheeded to the carpet. And me? A modest annuity, Crane replied weakly. The silence that followed was no longer subtle. You see, Rupert said hoarsely, there's your motive. For you? Poirot inquired softly. For anyone, Rupert shot back. If he was about to announce that publicly, it would alter expectations, Poirot finished. Lady Vane's composure cracked visibly. Alistair would never have humiliated his family. Madame, Poirot said, did you know of this change? She hesitated only a fraction too long. But
He mentioned considering philanthropy. But not the specifics. No? Poirot's eyes moved to Mrs. Pritchard. And you, madame, did you overhear any such discussion? I concern myself with household matters, she said stiffly. Indeed. Dr. Lisle spoke suddenly. Sir Alistair confided in me regarding his charitable intentions. Poirot's gaze shifted with quiet interest. Ah? He believed medical advancement essential, the doctor continued. His heart condition made him reflective. And did he discuss the announcement at the dinner? Yes. Then, Doctor, Poirot said mildly, you too would benefit professionally from such a foundation. Colour flared in Dr. Lisle's cheeks. That is irrelevant. Non, Poirot said softly. It is never irrelevant. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. So we've got a revised will. That widens motive.
Not narrows it. On the contrary, Poirot replied, it sharpens it. He moved again toward the mantel, fingers lightly brushing the air above the empty space. "The sapphire," he continued, "was to be worn at the dinner?" Lady Vane nodded faintly. "Yes." "So its disappearance would delay the event?" Poirot said. "Or at least disrupt it." Rupert frowned. "Unless the thief intended to sell it quickly." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded. "But the empty case placed in the study suggests deliberation, not haste." A knock sounded. The constable returned once more, murmuring to Japp. Inspector Japp listened, then looked up, slowly. "Traces of aconitine," he said. "In the brandy glass. Not enough in the decanter to account for it." A faint cry escaped Miss March. Dr. Lyle's face went ashen. "Aconitine acts rapidly." "Very rapidly," Poirot agreed quietly.
And is absorbed through the skin," Japp added. "Yes," Poirot said, "particularly if the skin is damp." All eyes drifted almost involuntarily to the vase. Mrs. Pritchard's lips parted. "That is impossible." "On the contrary," Poirot said, "a minute quantity introduced into the water would leave little trace in the decanter, yet appear in the glass if transferred." Rupert's voice was strained. "Transferred how?" "By the hand," Poirot replied. Miss March swayed slightly, catching herself on the mantel. Inspector Japp's tone hardened. "Who had access to aconitine?" Dr. Lyle answered reluctantly. "It is used rarely in certain cardiac preparations." "Such as those kept in the study?" Poirot asked quietly. The doctor's silence was answer enough. Rupert let out a bitter laugh. "So now we accuse the physician." "I accuse no one," Poirot repeated. "I observe that only one person here would possess both the knowledge and the means to handle such a substance safely." Dr. Lyle straightened. "You forget, Monsieur Poirot, that I examined Sir Alistair openly, hardly the act of a guilty man." "Or precisely the act," Poirot said gently. The doctor's composure trembled. Lady Vane rose abruptly. "This is monstrous. Dr. Lyle has served us faithfully." "And perhaps," Poirot said softly, "been rewarded insufficiently." Crane stared. "The Foundation?" "Yes," Poirot said. "A medical research trust administered perhaps by a trusted physician." Dr. Lyle's voice cracked. "You twist speculation into accusation." Poirot's eyes held his steadily. "Did you stand near Sir Alistair at any time after the tray was cleared?" Yes. I asked about his discomfort." "And did you touch the table?" "I may have. And the flowers." "I did not." Poirot stepped closer, his voice almost kind. "Doctor, when Miss March cried out, you reached Sir Alistair first." "Yes. And in doing so you held his right hand." The doctor swallowed. "To check his pulse." "Just so," Poirot said. Inspector Japp's gaze sharpened. "Meaning if the poison was on his hand, you'd know." A flicker, just a flicker, crossed Dr. Lyle's eyes. Poirot did not miss it. Outside, the wind rose faintly against the windows, a low, restless sound. Within the drawing room, the carefully aligned tulips stood motionless, their petals vivid against the lamplight. "Fear speaks in chorus," Poirot said softly. "But guilt breathes alone." And in that moment,
With the harmony that had united them at the beginning of the evening, fractured beyond repair. Dr. Lyle's composure did not shatter, it thinned. The distinction was subtle but unmistakable. A man unaccustomed to accusation may flare in indignation. A man who calculates must measure his response. "You imply," he said carefully, "that I administered aconitine by means of the flowers, allowed it to transfer to Sir Alistair's hand, and then obligingly confirmed his death. It is ingenious. It is also absurd." Poirot inclined his head. "It is incomplete, but it is not absurd." Inspector Japp stepped forward. "Doctor, where is your medical case?" In the study, Lyle replied. Bring it, Japp said. The doctor hesitated only a second before turning toward the corridor. The pause was brief, but in that pause something tightened in the room. Ordered Spectre, Poirot said softly. If you please. Japp nodded to the constable, who followed Dr. Lyle instead. Rupert exhaled sharply. If it's in his case, that's it. Non, Poirot said. If it is in his case, it is too easy. Lady Vane sank back once more, her eyes fixed upon the doorway through which the doctor had gone. Alistair trusted him, she murmured. Trust, Poirot replied gently, is the most delicate instrument in murder. Miss March clutched the edge of the mantle. But why the sapphire? Why the elaborate staging? To direct suspicion outward, Rupert said grimly. Toward a thief. Toward anyone, Poirot corrected. A theft confuses motive. It creates greed, where there may instead be strategy. Crane cleared his throat nervously. If Sir Alistair intended to divert his fortune to medical research, that would benefit Doctor, or Lyle immensely, but it would not benefit... He broke off, glancing uneasily at Lady Vane. Finish, Poirot invited. It would not benefit the household staff, Crane concluded weakly. Mrs. Pritchard stiffened. I require no charity from doctors. Perhaps not, Poirot said calmly. But stability, continuity, the preservation of Hallowmere House as it stands. Her eyes flickered just briefly. The constable returned first, carrying the leather medical case. He placed it on the sideboard. Doctor's just behind, he said. Poirot approached the case but did not open it. Instead, he regarded it as though it were an object on a chessboard whose placement mattered more than its contents. Dr. Lyle re-entered, face composed once more. You may examine it, he said coolly. Inspector Japp snapped the clasps and lifted the lid. Our instruments gleamed neatly within. Bottles were arranged in padded compartments. Japp lifted one vial, reading the label. Digitalis, laudanum. He paused, then withdrew a small, corked bottle, half hidden at the side. Aconitine, he read aloud. Silence. Dr. Lyle did not move. It is used in minute dosages. Was it used tonight? Japp demanded. No. Poirot stepped forward at last. Inspector, observe the level. Japp held the bottle up. The liquid within was nearly full. Does that prove innocence? Rupert demanded. It proves only that the bottle has not been emptied recklessly, Poirot replied. Dr. Lyle allowed himself a tight smile. You see? Poirot's gaze did not waver. Doctor, when you examined Sir Alistair, you took his right hand. Yes. And in doing so, you would have felt any dampness. Yes. And yet you did not remark upon it. There was no significance. Ah, Poirot murmured. But there was. Inspector Japp frowned. What are you getting at? Poirot turned slowly toward Mrs. Pritchard. Madame, he said softly, when you arranged the flowers this afternoon, did you trim the stems? Yes. With what? Scissors from the kitchen. And after trimming, did you leave the cut stems in water immediately? Of course. Poirot nodded. And if someone, later, wished to introduce a substance into the water, they would not need access to a decanter or glass, only a moment alone with the vase. Mrs. Pritchard's composure trembled. I was never alone. You stood in the corridor, Poirot said. You entered first when Miss March cried out. In that moment of confusion,
you were nearest the table. That proves nothing. It proves opportunity, Poirot said quietly. Rupert looked between them. You think the housekeeper poisoned him? I think, Poirot replied, that the person who moved the vase was not thinking of aesthetics alone. Lady Vane rose abruptly. This is outrageous. Mrs. Pritchard has been devoted to this family. Devotion, Poirot said softly, may take unexpected forms. Mrs. Pritchard's hands clenched at her sides. Sir Alistair meant to dismantle this house, to turn it into some institution. I heard him. Crane stiffened. You could not have. I overheard, she snapped. He spoke with the doctor in the study last week about closing Hallowmere after my lady's lifetime. Lady Vane stared at her. You never told me. It was not my place, Mrs. Pritchard replied, though her voice shook.
Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to Dr. Lisle, who stood very still. And if Hallowmere closed, Poirot said gently, your position, your life's work, would vanish. Mrs. Pritchard's lips pressed thin. I served faithfully. Indeed, Poirot said. Inspector Japp looked from one to the other. So which is it? The doctor for profit, or the housekeeper for preservation? Poirot folded his hands once more. Inspector, he said softly, what if it is neither motive alone, but both? A ripple of confusion passed through the room. The will benefits medical research, Poirot continued. The dissolution of Hallowmere threatens Madame Pritchard's existence. Dr. Lisle gains professionally. But there is something more. He stepped toward the mantel and rested his fingertips lightly upon the polished wood where the sapphire had once lain. The jewel was not taken for money, he said quietly. It was taken because Sir Alistair saw it taken. Every face turned toward him. He saw, Poirot repeated, and that is why he had to die. The words did not explode. They settled, heavy and irrevocable. Rupert was the first to find his voice. Saw it taken? You mean the sapphire wasn't part of the plan? On the contrary, Poirot replied softly. It was essential, but not in the manner we first supposed. He turned from the mantel and faced them all. Consider, he said, the sequence. Sir Alistair sits here. The coffee has been served, the brandy poured. Monsieur Rupert stirs the fire. Conversation continues. At some moment, brief, precise, the sapphire is removed from the mantel. And he notices, Hastings said quietly. Yes, Poirot replied. He notices.
He is a man who observes order. The absence of the jewel would strike him instantly. Inspector Japp nodded slowly. He'd speak. Exactly, said Poirot. He would exclaim. He would rise, perhaps. And in rising, he gestured toward the rug's folded edge. He disturbs the carpet, Rupert murmured. Just so. Lady Vane stared at the mantel as though she could will the sapphire back into existence. But no one cried out. There was no accusation. Because, Poirot said gently, he did not have time. Silence thickened. He saw the theft, Poirot continued. He began to react, and in that instant the murderer understood that the theft could not stand alone. It required completion. Dr. Lisle's face had grown very still. Inspector Japp spoke sharply. Completion, meaning murder. Yes. Then the poison wasn't premeditated, Rupert demanded.
Poirot's eyes flicked toward the medical case. The poison was available, the opportunity arose, the plan adapted. Miss March shook her head faintly. But how could someone administer aconitine so quickly? With knowledge, Poirot said, and proximity. He walked slowly toward Dr. Lisle. Doctor, he said quietly, when Sir Alistair showed signs of agitation, perhaps a sudden movement, perhaps an exclamation, you would naturally approach him. As his physician, Lisle replied evenly. Precisely. You would take his hand, steady him, perhaps reach for his glass, urging calm. I did nothing of the sort. Poirot's gaze did not waver. You had aconitine in your possession, a minute quantity upon the fingertip, transferred to the rim of his brandy glass, or directly to his skin, would suffice. Inspector Japp's eyes narrowed. And with his weak heart, the effect would be swift, Poirot finished. Rupert stepped forward. But the flowers, the water, a distraction, Poirot said. A possibility I allowed to grow. Japp blinked. You never believed in the vase? I believed in reaction, Poirot replied calmly. When I suggested the flowers, who protested most strongly? Who sought to redirect? All eyes turned, slowly, toward Dr. Lyle. Colour drained from his face. You are playing games, he said tightly. No, Poirot answered softly. You are. He moved to the side table and lifted the brandy glass once more with his handkerchief. The laboratory found aconitine in the glass, but not in the decanter. That means the poison was introduced after the pour. Dr. Lyle said nothing. You stood closest when Sir Alistair faltered, Poirot continued. You held his right hand. You were the first to declare heart failure, and you alone possessed both the means and the confidence to act within seconds. Lady Vane whispered, But the will, the foundation. Yes, Poirot said gently. Sir Alistair intended to endow medical research. The doctor stood to gain prestige, funding, influence. But perhaps he feared delay, or alteration, or perhaps... He paused. Perhaps Sir Alistair had second thoughts. Crane looked up sharply. He did mention reviewing the terms again. Dr. Lyle's composure fractured. You see, Poirot said quietly. The announcement at the dinner might not have been what you expected, a withdrawal, a revision. You could not risk uncertainty. That is conjecture, Lyle snapped. No, Poirot said. It is psychology. Inspector Japp stepped closer. And the sapphire? A brilliant improvisation, Poirot replied. In the confusion of Sir Alistair's collapse, the doctor removed the jewel, intending to create a motive unrelated to himself. Later, he placed the empty case in the study to suggest calculated theft. Rupert stared. But anyone could have taken it. Anyone, Poirot agreed. Which is precisely why it was effective. Miss March covered her mouth. Then the agreement, the insistence on heart failure, came first from the doctor, Poirot said softly, and was eagerly accepted by those who found comfort in it. Dr. Lyle's shoulders sagged, just perceptibly. Inspector Japp's voice hardened. Dr. Lyle, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder. For a moment it seemed he might protest again. Instead, he gave a short, brittle laugh.
It was opportunity, he said faintly. He startled me, reached toward the mantel. I acted. Lady Vane made a strangled sound. You see, Poirot said gently. Adaptation. Not long design, perhaps, but decisive. And the sapphire? Japp demanded. In the study desk, Lyle replied hollowly. Behind the ledger. The constable moved at once. Silence filled the drawing room as Dr. Lyle was led away. The tulips stood unchanged, their symmetry intact. Rupert sank into a chair. All that for a moment's panic. For ambition, Poirot corrected softly, and fear of loss. Lady Vane's voice trembled. We all agreed so quickly. Yes, Poirot said, because agreement is easier than doubt. Inspector Japp exhaled. You nearly had me chasing flowers. Poirot's moustaches lifted faintly.
One must sometimes water the wrong plant to see which roots stir. Outside, the night lay deep over Hallowmere House. Within, order had been disturbed and restored. Poirot adjusted a tulip stem by a fraction of an inch. Come, Hastings, he said quietly. There is nothing more to agree upon. The following morning broke cold and crystalline over Hallowmere House, as though the world itself had been scrubbed clean of the previous evening's discord. Frost silvered the lawns, the windows caught the pale light with indifferent brilliance. Within, however, the air still held the residue of revelation. Dr. Lyle had confessed before midnight. Inspector Japp, who relayed the particulars to us in the drawing-room where it had all begun, did so with professional briskness, tinged by reluctant admiration. He'd been carrying aconitine for months, Japp said. Said he'd considered using it before, never dared. When Sir Alistair rose suddenly and reached toward the mantel, the doctor thought he meant to dismiss him, cut him out of the foundation. Panic set in. He had the vial in his pocket, touched a drop to his finger while Rupert was at the fire. Rupert stared into the grate, unlit now. And when my uncle saw the sapphire gone, he seized the moment, Japp finished, took the old gentleman's hand under pretense of calming him, transferred enough to do the trick. Quick, efficient. By the time the cry went up, it was already working. Lady Vane sat very still. And the jewel? Removed in the confusion, Japp replied. Placed in the study later when he went to fetch his case.
Our empty box left for us to find. Poirot listened without interruption, fingertips lightly touching one another. He admitted, Japp continued, that when you began talking about the flowers, he thought for a second you'd somehow seen him. Poirot allowed himself the faintest inclination of the head. The guilty often reveal themselves not by what they deny, but by what they fear. Miss March, pale but composed, spoke softly. He seemed so calm. Yes, Poirot said. Because he believed in agreement. He relied upon the authority of his profession, the convenience of Sir Alistair's age, the comfort of a natural explanation. He understood human preference. And you, Rupert said quietly, understood his. Poirot smiled faintly. I understood that a man who acts in panic must also act in haste.
And the poison in the glass, but not the decanter. Too convenient. The empty case displayed. Too deliberate. A murderer who improvises leaves traces of adjustment. Mrs. Pritchard, who had hovered near the doorway, as though uncertain of her place in this altered order, spoke in a subdued tone. And I thought you suspected me. For a moment, Poirot said gently. You suspected yourself. She looked startled. You feared that your desire to preserve Hallowmere might be interpreted as motive, he continued. Fear makes us imagine accusation. Her lips trembled. I would never harm him. I know, Poirot said simply. Lady Vane rose and moved toward the mantel, her gaze lingering on the restored sapphire, now back in its accustomed place. He saw it taken, she murmured. That was the moment. Yes, Poirot replied. Had he not observed, there might have been only theft, but observation transforms circumstance. Rupert gave a short, humourless breath. And all of us, so ready to agree. Agreement, Poirot said softly, is a refuge. It spares us from examining the uncomfortable. Inspector Japp closed his notebook. You saw through it from the start. Non, Poirot corrected. I merely distrusted harmony. He moved once more to the wing chair, standing behind it rather than sitting. Sir Alistair was a man attentive to order. He would not have allowed disorder without remark. Therefore, when I saw the rug disturbed, the cuff twisted, the glass imperfectly aligned, I knew that something had interrupted him mid-thought. A heart does not fold a carpet. Miss March managed a faint smile through her lingering distress. And the flowers? Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes glinted. So, a useful hypothesis. When one introduces a possibility that unsettles the guilty, one watches carefully who seeks to uproot it. Rupert looked up. You were never certain about the vase. I was certain only that someone would betray unease, Poirot said. The doctor's reaction was immediate, too immediate. Lady Vane drew a slow breath. He served us for years. Yes, Poirot said quietly. Ambition does not always begin with malice. It may begin with gratitude and evolve. Silence settled, gentler now. Outside, a carriage approached to convey Poirot and me back to London. The business of law and consequence would proceed without him. His work here was complete. As we prepared to depart, Lady Vane extended her hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice steadier than before, "you have restored more than justice. You have restored clarity." Poirot bowed over her hand with impeccable courtesy. "Madame, clarity is merely truth arranged properly." Rupert accompanied us to the door. "I was ready to blame anyone," he admitted, "even myself." Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. "Then learn this, monsieur. When everyone agrees too quickly, ask who benefits most from silence." The frost crunched beneath our steps as we descended the drive. Hastings, that is to say I, could not resist one final question. "You were quite certain in the end," I said. "But at the beginning—" Poirot adjusted his gloves with fastidious care. "At the beginning, Hastings," he replied, "I knew only this. Death that is too readily explained is rarely natural. And when human beings unite in perfect accord, it is often because they share not truth, but relief." He paused, glancing back once at the stately facade of Hallowmere House. "The little grey cells," he added lightly, "prefer discord. It reveals character." With that, Hercule Poirot stepped into the carriage, immaculate as ever, leaving behind a house reordered, not by agreement, but by understanding.